A small-time pirate is putting together a crew. Let's talk Star Wars Mandalorian.
How you get so big getting food of this kind?
Hello and welcome to this week's spoiler-filled review for episode 6 of The Mandalorian, The Prisoner. There will be, as I said, spoilers beyond this point, so please be aware, because they're gonna start right now. This episode was amazing. I think that it is probably, and just in terms of production value-wise, the strongest episode they had. There were just so many different sets that they would have had to have created, less kind of on location kind of stuff, and so many of them, and then they used those spaces so effectively that the show just looked really good in this episode. One thing that TV shows in general, not to target just The Mandalorian, but TV in general, the way you can kind of tell the difference between a seasoned crew and an experienced crew, or a crew with money and a crew that doesn't have money, is lighting. Lighting, I think, is really the difference between that TV or even fan film looking experience and something cinematic. Is people who really know how to light a set effectively and how to use the space within the lighting effectively. And this episode looked really cinematic. I thought everything was constructed really well. At no point was I reminded that I was watching a TV show instead of a movie. And it's something where TV has really come a long way, but something where I think this episode especially did better than any other episode this season. Not that any of the episodes have been particularly bad, but this one, I don't know, you can really tell that they had a clear vision with what they wanted to do, and it was set up really well. The writing of this particular episode was just really solid. Also, just the way little things were interwoven, watching it a second time, little bits of dialogue that I picked up on. I just felt like, structure-wise, I mean, really just from, not that anything art is objective, I really hate it when I hear something like, this movie was objectively bad, or this movie was objectively the best, because there really is no objectivity when it comes to something creative. But to the extent that you can say something without bias, I think that this one just did the technical and production aspects of the show better than any episode we had seen prior. It was just solid all the way through, and the story, is near as I can tell after 2 viewings, had no real glaring issues to it. I think that it is easily the best episode of the season just from a creation standpoint. Now, my ranking of these episodes, like if I were to rank out my favorites, there is a direct correlation and causation between how much screen time Baby Yoda gets with where I would rank the episode. So at the end of the day, episode 2 is always going to own my heart. That's also because it cheats, because it also has Jawas. But conveniently enough, it's the same director as episode 2, so he kind of brought his vision and structure that he had so solidly in that second episode and brought it into this one, which was not about egg-eating Jawas, but rather about a nasty, nasty gang of ruffians. Oddly enough, this is the only other time we've seen Yodel kind of reference the Force at all, since the incident with the Mudhorn, and it happens to once again be the same guy, so just kind of an interesting coincidence. With that said, let's start talking about some of the things in this episode itself, because there were a lot of really good moments. We start with the Mandalorian in the Razor Crest, landing inside of some sort of strange space station. His ship still needs some repairs, but it's definitely flyable, and he's found another job. We're seeing now that he is still working as a bounty hunter. It's kind of odd to think of, the single dad in space still taking care of this kid, and he's largely doing it because he's still on the run. I mean, if you watched the previously on The Mandalorian, it was entirely about more bounties coming after the child, but we don't see any of that happen within the episode. So it's almost like that previously was to remind you, why is he on the run with the kid in the first place? Why does he still have Yodel with him, even though he's still trying to be a bounty hunter? Obviously, he needs a job. Like, they need to pay for fuel to be on the run. They need to be able to eat. And he's probably not going to pick up a job as an accountant anywhere because he needs to be on the run. So bounty hunting is what he does best. It's something he can do, but it's also something that is going to constantly keep him and Yodel in danger, because he's basically announcing himself to a lot of unsavory types. We can see that he's still kind of gone to keeping the child locked up in the little closet thing in order to keep him safe. he's definitely kind of at a loss in what he is supposed to do. I mean, when he goes to take this job, he's even like, the ship wasn't a part of a deal. I think he was hoping to just join the crew and leave the ship on the space station and hope Yodel doesn't get out. I'm really not sure what he is supposed to do with the kid unless he, takes decidedly less dangerous jobs, but I'm not really sure what those would be. So he really is in a bit of a bind, and I think that's something that he's going to eventually have to come to terms on, or in some way the child is going to have to age to some degree where he can at least more safely go along with him. I think a lot that's going to happen there is going to depend on how the season ends. But basically, we're on another Bounty of the Week type episode, like we saw last week, where he's just trying to make ends meet so he can continue to buy his child lots of food with bones in it, because I'm sure the little guy is pretty hungry. The first few minutes of the episode where he's talking to his old colleague that he used to pal around with gives us new insights into his past. Much like what we learned from Hype recently on Star Wars Resistance a couple of weeks ago, we see that Mando used to run with some more unsavory types, a group that he did eventually leave, probably over some sort of moral compulsion. What I like about this, what we learn, is that the Mandalorian has a really strong sense of honor and some sort of code long before he met Yodel. I think it would be easy to think that he was always this grisly fellow, and then he met Baby Yoda along with the rest of us and was so overcome by the cuteness, like the rest of us, that he then just became a better person. But it looks here that he at least gained a conscience at some point far prior, or perhaps always had one, and that's why he left the group to begin with. We also see that there was probably some sort of large falling out that was related to how the brother got caught by the New Republic in the first place. Right at the beginning of the episode, the first time I watched it, I knew something was shifty because we have one scene where Mando is being welcomed back to the station and is literally told, "You're always welcome back here." And then he starts talking about the mission, and it comes up that they need the Razor Crest, and his friend is like, "No, I literally only let you back here because of the Razor Crest." So suddenly he's gone from everything is fine, like in the docking bay where everyone can see them, to when it's just them one-on-one, it's actually like, "No, not everything is fine, we need your ship, okay? You're gonna deal with this, and you're gonna be grateful that you're back." Again, we would later come to understand that this must have something to do with the betrayal incident for the brother that ends up being what the rest of the episode is. Another kind of interesting line that I didn't pick up on the first time, but I picked up on the second time, is when the mission is described, they say they have a colleague that basically got captured by a group of competitors. In a way, this is true, right? If they see the Mandalorian as a competitor now because he left them and supposedly, at least from their perspective, betrayed them, then the brother would have been captured because of a rival. So what he told him was true from a certain point of view. And it's something where the trick that they were all playing on Mando makes a lot more sense when you watch it back through again and you can kind of see it coming, but it wasn't really there from the beginning, if you didn't really have context to put all of these bits and pieces in. As we get to meet the whole crew, there's a couple of really good kind of internal Star Wars jokes. The one guy, the bald one, said, "I used to be an Imperial sharpshooter." Mando said he wasn't impressed by that, and he makes a crack about how he wasn't a stormtrooper, but he's kind of indignant about it, and I like this idea that stormtroopers, even within Star Wars, have this idea like they can't shoot and they can't hit anything. Although the way Baldy said it, it's also distinctly possible that like he also isn't a stormtrooper and was indignant that he, who was probably a higher class of Imperial soldier, was being called a stormtrooper, but also maybe mad that that idea even exists. But either way, I thought it was kind of funny. And then the muscle of the group, the Deveronian, I think is how you would say the name. Anyway, the devil alien is played by Clancy Brown. You may recognize Clancy Brown as Savage Opress from Star Wars The Clone Wars, so he is making a new appearance back in Star Wars. You may also know him as Mr. Krabs. That said, this group of people are a bunch of jerks. They were terrible, they were well written, well casted, well done, terrible people. Never in my life have I met a group of Star Wars characters that I wanted to die slowly in a gruesome way than I had of this group of bounty hunters. And yes, it has largely to do with the fact that Baldy was playing Whoops, I Dropped Him with my son. And if he had wound up with a shiv in his stomach partway through the episode and then ejected into space, I wouldn't have even been mad about it. Like, this group of people were terrible. They were making fun of Mando for his mask. They were mocking "this is the way." They were teasing my son and pretending like he was just a pet. They were awful, nasty, terrible people who ended up being awful, nasty, terrible people, which was not a surprise in the least. And I just have to say that maybe Mando is a better person than me because he didn't kill them, because I was very gleeful when I thought he had systematically executed each and every one of them, because, yeah. But actually, oddly enough, the only one he actually killed was the droid, because he hates droids, and we keep getting told how much he hates droids. I mean, it makes sense. Like, I get it. He was a kid. He was a refugee in the Clone Wars. His parents were probably murdered by droids. He hates droids. That makes total sense. But I also love this as just this ongoing thing that he constantly hates droids. And I really hope that in some way this comes to pay off in some larger thing, either by we really get to, see how this came about. Maybe if we see a reincarnation of IG-11 again, which we should based off of what we've seen from promotional material, but we don't truly know that. But there is some appearances of IG-11 from trailers and things that did not appear in the first episode, so whether that was just cut from the first episode or he just is coming back, we don't know. But I would love to see them, maybe as buddies, to kind of play off of his droid hatred thing. We'll see. But I like that this continues to be a reoccurring thing. Then we get on the New Republic ship, and this set was amazing. They do so much with blank space. It's basically a series of hallways. It felt so much like any kind of Star Wars game I've ever played, especially like Knights of the Old Republic. In fact, when the prison goes into lockdown and the red lights are flashing, I really felt like we were walking around the Leviathan during that part of Knights of the Old Republic. But it felt like that kind of classic, greasy, grimy, expanded universe, Legends, old school, underworld kind of place, even though it was a New Republic ship. They really captured that vibe well. And I like that it was the group of them, and they're all huddled in the corner, and they're trying to make fun of the Mandalorian and mock him and be like, well, are you gonna go be awesome or not? And then he's like already flanked the enemy and he just wrecks these droids with abandon. And that was a really solid part. It was good to see him more in his element. We've seen him in a couple of fights now. Sometimes he's gotten kind of throttled because he didn't have his armor yet. Since the third episode, we've seen him in his full armor. We get to see him really show his stuff. We got to see the whisper birds again. He got his flamethrower restocked. He's using his little grappling hook. He's just kind of like the bits and bobs Inspector Gadget of the Star Wars crime world, and he's doing a really solid job. That said, after seeing him wreck a bunch of droids, we see that he doesn't like to take life unnecessarily. We meet the New Republic officer, and Mando tries to spare his life, and it doesn't go particularly well. It's always interesting to see the bounty hunter, the guy who we've seen just wipe out living people in past episodes, but he's trying to spare this New Republic person, whether that's out of just simply not wanting the New Republic on his case or because he sees him as an innocent person, we don't know. Now, when I was watching the episode, I could not help but feel like I was supposed to know the New Republic guy, and I was looking at him like he looks so familiar. What am I missing? I don't get it. Well, when I watched the credits, lo and behold, the New Republic guy is Matt Lanter, who you might also know as the voice of Anakin on Star Wars The Clone Wars. So now we have two Star Wars voice actors appearing in this scene. That probably was fun for them to get to kind of act in person after sharing voice space with each other throughout the Clone Wars, and once again being on opposite sides. And it was a fun little cameo because Matt Lanter, yeah, he voiced Anakin, but he also was a lead character on the show Timeless, which I've never watched, I have to admit, but it was a major network television show. He could have actually had a larger role. Like, he could have played another bounty hunter, but they kind of stuck him in as the New Republic guy, probably just to let him come in and have a little bit of fun. So I thought that was a neat little detail. Here comes the thing of the New Republic tracker, because it wouldn't be an episode of The Mandalorian unless there was some kind of tracker beacon going towards someone, right? As they kill New Republic Anakin, he hits the button and falls, and the New Republic is coming in. This actually sets up the resolution of the whole episode, which I'll get to in a minute. But now they're in a time crunch. The New Republic's coming. They don't want legitimate government heat on their tail, so they have to hurry up. And they go to the cell, and this is where everything really takes that turn. We find out that the prisoner is the brother of the chick who claims she used to be the Mandalorian's girlfriend, whether or not she was just like the lover spurned and trying to act like they had a thing and she's really mad about it, but they never really did, or whether or not they really did have a thing. The episode leaves intentionally ambiguous. We find out that they've gone for her brother. He's like, how ironic, my savior is the guy who left me behind. So this is the point where you kind of see that everything that's gone on here is both a rescue mission for the brother, and they probably really did need the Razor Crest for the reasons why they say they need the Razor Crest in the episode, but it was also a revenge thing on Mando. Now, I don't know if they were supposed to leave him behind in the cell. At one point, somebody does say, yeah, I know we should have finished him off, but we didn't. But they wanted to leave him up behind and alive in the cell, probably just to mock him and make fun of him and cage him and make him live with the decision, and thinking it's funny if the New Republic meets him, that sort of thing. But that ends up being a grave mistake for them because our friend the Mandalorian cannot be held by cages for very long. He mutilates yet another droid and finds a way to escape. He makes it to the control room and basically turns the whole jail against them. I'm really surprised he didn't actually just open up the cell, but instead he makes it this kind of hunting, stalking thing, and we really get to see him at his best. You know, the hallway's dark and spooky, and he's trapping with his grappling hook and with the doors Clancy Brown, and then we have Baldy and the Twilight Girl, and he's like catching them in the hallway. One of my favorite shots in the whole episode is when he's stalking behind Baldy and is like just appearing in between the flashes of light. Like, that was one of the most amazing sequences. I think that sequence, and then like episode 3's sequence where Mando is realizing how terrible of a person he was to leave the child with the Empire and like staring at the knobby bit from his ship. I think like those are the two best done scenes without dialogue in the series so far. That's one of the parts where I was talking about like the lighting and everything. I thought that was a really well done sequence to kind of create this feeling of partially terror, because you're seeing how terrifying the Mandalorian is, but also fun because you're rooting for the Mandalorian, and so it was this nice like dichotomy of feeling that was going on there. So I thought that was a really good sequence. Now, after he is systematically taking care of all of them, he gets to the brother, and the brother strikes up a deal with him. Now, at this point, Mando has already gone back to the control room and taken the New Republic beacon. I've said a couple of times throughout this series that Mando is really good at predicting people's behavior. Now, he can get tricked into that cell because he's not expecting them to go after the brother. He can't see the future. Once he knows what he's dealing with, he can really effectively handle it. So once he knows he's dealing with his brother, he knows that the brother doesn't really care about anyone else, right? They've launched this whole mission to rescue him, where he's like, you know, what about my sister? Like, he's perfectly fine leaving everybody else behind to save his own skin. So I think Mando knows exactly what the brother ultimately tells him, which is, you're not going to get your money unless you bring me in. So that's when he grabs the beacon, and he keeps the beacon with him all along, because his plan was always take him in, get his money, and then take these guys out with the New Republic's help, because he knows that they're going to turn on him. Like, once he has gotten in that cell, I think he knows the entire trajectory of the rest of the episode. It was just, he needed all the cards on the table before he could do anything with them. But as much as he's physically awesome and wrecking everybody in this episode, I love how smart he is. And I love that he's not really that super hyper powerful. Like, he can wreck everybody because his armor's awesome and he has all these cool gadgets. But he can still get bested, he can still get locked in a cell, like, he still finds himself in peril every episode. But he can be in peril and then be smart enough to get himself out of it. So yeah, he has a lot of brawn, but he's not a grunt, and that's what I really appreciate about him as a character. Now, while all of this is going on, we finally have some content of my son. Again, really, at the end of the day, I adore this episode. I think it's amazing, but there was very little yodel going on, and that's really too bad. But it's understandable. The show is called The Mandalorian and not Yodel. Hopefully the second season will actually just be called The Baby Yoda Show and give us what I think we all really want, or at least what I really want. I like how Yodel gets out of his little closet and finds the droid Zero, and Zero has kind of started to put together what's going on, right? Like, he's seen Grief Karga's message and realizes that the Mando didn't deliver something, but he hasn't really connected that that something is the child. Or if he did, he certainly wouldn't be trying to kill Baby Yoda. So I think he must think it's some kind of pest on the ship or something. He doesn't really understand what's going on. Or maybe he knows exactly what it is and he's decided to get the bounty, but he's going to kill the child in order to do it. Doesn't really specify. But there we have kind of a reverse hunt scene. You know, up until this point we've been watching the Mandalorian hunt people. Now we're watching Baby Yoda get hunted. But it was like, I wasn't even terrified. Like, I knew he was gonna be fine. It was just like the cutest little terrifying hunting scene ever. Like, Zero grabs the gun and turns around, and Yodel is gone, and he's stalking him through the ship, and Yodel's hiding behind things, and then somehow ends up back inside his little closet thing. And then it's my favorite part, which is Yodel reaches out to use the Force, and I really hadn't been expecting Yodel to use the Force already. I figured if we saw that again, we'd see it in the last episode. But there's this moment where he's like reaching his hand out, and he's like making the same face he made against the Mudhorn. And there's this brief moment where you think he stopped the droid, and then it's really Mando behind the droid that has keeled the droid over. Now, I will say this is the third time in 6 episodes that this show has used the old "I thought somebody shot but really somebody else shot the gun" trick. It's a solid trick, but using it 50% of the time might be a little much, but that's okay. It is very much a trope. And every time they've used it, it's been used very effectively. I'm just pointing out that it's been used in 50% of the episodes so far. That said, it's my favorite moment of the episode because Yodel, like, is holding his hand out and the droid freaks out and he looks at his hand like, did I do it? I did it again. And then it's actually the Mandalorian. And like the look on his face is like excited to see Dad, but also like, oh, I thought I did it. You know, I thought I was riding the bike. I didn't know you were still hanging on to the bike. Kind of a disappointment. But it also makes me wonder how much Yodel knows he can use the Force. I kind of wonder if when we see him use the Force against the Mudhorn, if that wasn't the first time he'd really used the Force to some sort of large degree. A lot of times we'll see people use the Force who don't typically use the Force in a moment of adrenaline, that the adrenaline and instinct take over and it kind of supersedes what you know is possible. And this is when people can find out that they have Force powers. And it's distinctly possible that Yodel kind of used the Force for the first time in the second episode. And this was him being like, my dad's not around, I'm gonna try to use the Force now. And then not really getting the opportunity to find out if he could again. So I thought that was a kind of a cute little moment. I feel like if Yodel could actively use the Force all the time, he'd be wreaking even more havoc with the Force than he is currently wreaking havoc with just himself now. So I think that's kind of cute, and it's a way to give Yodel a character arc. Like, it's so easy to just think he's a cute baby and make him do cute baby things, but if he's like, what is this Force thing, and he's trying to figure out what this Force thing is as a baby, it's a great way to give a baby character growth and development, and that would be a really genius thing to do if they go that route. But the end of the episode is Mando taking the brother back to see his friend, getting paid, he flies away, and then that's when the friend is like, kill him. Now that ship that comes up looks an awfully lot like General Grievous's ship, which is cool if it would be a similar model, but this is where we know that Mando really got everything under control, because as they're coming out to attack him, 3 X-Wing pilots show up and they're going to take down the station. And of course they're going to take down the station because there is that ship that's coming up to fire at Mando. So they wouldn't necessarily just fire on a station in the middle of space, but if they're following a distress beacon to there and there's a combat ship, you know, then they're going to want to take action. And we don't really see whether or not they destroy the whole station or not. Now, you may have recognized at least one of those faces of the X-Wing pilots. It's possible you recognized all 3, but the main X-Wing pilot that you see is, of course, Dave Filoni, who is the director of 2 episodes of the show, as well as, you know, the supervising director and mind behind Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels, and is an executive producer on Resistance, so he's kind of the king of Star Wars animation right now, so it's cool to see him in it, but he's also, like I said, a director of 2 of these episodes. We also see Deborah Chow and Rick Famuyiwa. Rick Famuyiwa was, of course, the director of this episode and the second chapter. Deborah Chow is the director of the 3rd episode as well as the next one. And then, of course, Filoni directed last week's and chapter 1. Now, when I just saw Dave Filoni, I gotta admit, I was really excited. Like, it's awesome to see Dave Filoni, but it really took me out of it. Like, Matt Lanter's cameo, I didn't really recognize him. Like, I knew there was something going on there, but it didn't take me out of the moment, and part of that was the intensity of the scene. This was like Dave Filoni in a cockpit, only his face was lit, and they wanted you to really, really understand that it was Dave Filoni, and they didn't try to hide that it was Dave Filoni at all. So at first I thought it was really cool, but I was also really taken out of the moment. But then when I realized it was like 3 of the directors and they were all flying together, I really liked that. And I thought that was a cute moment to let them kind of come in as X-Wings together. Generally speaking, I love Easter eggs and I love cameos as long as they don't break the fourth wall too much for me. Like, as long as I'm not really sucked out of the movie and my experience is kind of distracted, I really like that kind of stuff. And I don't really know if it was too obvious and too on the nose for me, or if I absolutely adore it, or if it might actually be both. But either way, it was cool to see it, and Filoni has been around for so long, it's good to kind of give him an on-screen speaking role. He is the voice of Chopper and Bo Keevil from Rebels and Resistance, respectively. So it is cool to kind of let his face be in the show finally. Now, speaking of the New Republic, what's interesting is we find out that the mercs are all left behind in a cell, which he presumably did partly to do unto them what they had done unto him. Partly probably to prove that he didn't need to kill them, he could best them on his own. But I do think it could have some larger plot implications. He's kind of got a list of people that he's ticked off who might come back as enemies, if not this season, then next. What happened with Grief Karga will probably get resolved this season, just to resolve his state of employment. I don't believe that the assassin from last week is dead. These guys are locked in a cell. I could see them all kind of becoming reoccurring villains later on down the line. But it's also interesting because they're in the custody of the New Republic, and they at least know about the child. They might not know about the bounty, because I don't think Zero ever told them. But they could just mention that we were here and there's a Mandalorian, he's out there on a Razor Crest and he's got some sort of weird frog thing as a pet, and that could tip the New Republic off if they're in some way involved with Baby Yoda, which we don't actually know. So I'm kind of curious if that will just be an incidental thing, or if it'll become a big deal that they have seen Yodel. And then the other cute thing at the end is that they're chilling in the ship, Mando's flying, Yodel's in his car seat, and the Mando, takes the knob off the ship and just gives it to him, which was a nice callback reference to the third episode, and a sweet moment between the two of them. Also, really quick, I just want to give a shout out to all my friends in the Star Wars Reference Discord, who every week help me make sure that I caught all the Easter eggs that I thought I caught, and that I actually understood all the things that I thought I understood. And to my buddy Apsis, who actually helped me get really good screenshots for once, instead of the ones I had been doing, which were just pictures on my television. So thank you guys for helping me out every week, because you guys are pretty awesome. But that's what I have to say about this episode. Those are my kind of thoughts and observations having watched it. Let me know what you think of the episode in the comment section. If you haven't already, follow us on all the socials. I will probably not be on Twitter until after the Rise of Skywalker premiere, so you really can't find us on Twitter very much right now. But in the future, you can find us on Twitter, so you should totally follow us there. And until next time, keep it real and fly casual.
Cooking can be fun!